All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, I'm going to step into the role of your personal financial advisor, and we're going to do a tough love post-mortem on how some of the world's absolute biggest creative idols completely ruined their businesses. We're looking at the rock and roll excess of the 1960s and 70s, but we're ignoring the music entirely to focus solely on the balance sheets. If you're a modern creative entrepreneur, a startup founder, or an artist trying to build a brand, consider this your masterclass in what happens when brilliant, world-changing vision meets absolute business ignorance. £200,000. Now, to put that staggering number into perspective, if we adjust for inflation, we're talking about roughly $4.8 million today. And that is exactly how much the Beatles' newly formed company, Apple Corp., managed to lose in just its first 7 months of existence. 7 months. They bled cash across film, electronics, publishing, and fashion, all because they allowed this sort of utopian, anything-goes ethos to completely replace solid financial judgment. So the absolutely crucial point here is that no amount of creative genius, none, can save a startup from financial insolvency when there's zero budget and zero discipline. John Lennon realized, way too late, honestly, that their friends and staff were living, eating, and drinking like Roman emperors entirely on the band's time. Look, without a strict budget to dictate what can actually be spent on big-ticket items, daily operations, or even just basic overhead, you are effectively navigating a sinking ship without a compass. Our agenda today is designed to act as your rigorous financial toolkit. We'll be walking through 1. A cautionary startup tale. 2. Reckless investments and nepotism. 3. The dangers of distant management. 4. Compliance and asset liquidity. 5. Red flags of bad management. And finally, 6. Your partner vetting checklist. Okay, Section 1. A cautionary startup tale. Let's look at the true origins of Apple Corp. You know, while the Beatles publicly preached about building this beautiful, utopian haven where artists could just create without corporate interference, the business reality was way less romantic. Following the death of their manager, Brian Epstein, the band was staring down the barrel of a massive tax bill from the British government. Since the corporate tax rate was significantly lower than the individual rate back then, they essentially needed a corporate tax shelter. So they poured their fortune into a business venture. The fatal flaw, though, they had absolutely no idea how to actually run one. Moving on to Section 2, reckless investments and nepotism. Why hiring unqualified friends is basically a guarantee of ruin. This perfectly illustrates the sheer cost of ignorance. The Beatles threw millions of dollars at literally the most ludicrous pitches, from totally unqualified friends. I mean, they hired a so-called guru who promised them musical wallpaper and a flying saucer powered by their car engines, an artificial sun and a levitating house. They actually placed a mystic on the official payroll who made major corporate decisions by tossing I-Ching coins. They let a former supermarket manager run a high-end boutique. It was entirely nepotism. They hired based on friendship instead of doing any due diligence or vetting these investments for actual market viability. It's a really harsh truth for creatives, but we have to face it. If you don't actually understand the underlying mechanics of what you are investing your company's money into, you are just throwing it away. The Beatles genuinely wanted to empower people, but they essentially handed blank checks to anyone who walked into their office with a wild idea. As a founder, if an investment pitch is so complex or honestly so absurd that you can't explain how it's going to generate a return, you absolutely should not be putting a single dime into it. Section 3. The dangers of distant management. Let's look at the incredibly tragic demise of the band Badfinger. Now, Badfinger was often dubbed the New Beatles. They were insanely talented, but they ended up handing complete control of their destiny over to a veteran American manager named Stan Pauly. They signed a massive, life-changing contract, but they allowed Pauly to handle all the funds, placing their advances into an escrow account. Because their management was distant, inaccessible, and totally unchecked, the band was left completely disconnected from their own revenue stream. This devastating sequence of events shows us the very human, catastrophic cost of bad contracts and inaccessible management. Despite writing massive hits that generated millions, the band members literally couldn't pay their electric bills. When their $2 million advance mysteriously vanished into that escrow account we just talked about, the financial pressure became fatal. Facing frozen funds, looming lawsuits, and an impending child, Pete Ham tragically took his own life, explicitly naming his manager in his suicide note. And years later, his bandmate Tom Evans did the exact same thing. This isn't just about losing money, guys. It's about how total financial vulnerability can destroy lives. Let's pivot to Section 4, compliance and asset liquidity. securing your physical and digital assets. Think about this for a second. When a retail venture fails, what do you do with all the leftover stock? Well, when the Apple boutique predictably collapsed, rather than properly liquidating the merchandise to try and recoup some of those massive losses, the band decided, hey, let's just give all the inventory away to the public for free. From a financial advisory standpoint, that is an absolute nightmare. You must always consider the tax consequences of transferring assets. Gifting away a whole boutique's worth of expensive goods doesn't just lose you your initial investment. It drastically reduces your lifetime gift tax exemptions. They effectively created a secondary, massive tax bill for themselves, right on top of a failed business. And it compounded their financial ruin simply because they didn't, consult a tax professional. And that utter lack of compliance extended right into their daily operations. Because they had zero oversight and no experienced executives actually in the building, the Apple office basically became a giant hangout spot. Staff were making wildly expensive international phone calls like it was nothing. Promoters and employees were just picking up expensive office rugs, televisions, cameras, and walking right out the front door with them. At one point, office boys were literally stealing the lead off the company's roof to sell as scrap. It was blatant, totally unchecked theft from the inside out. To prevent this absolute chaos in your startup, you have to institute these exact layers of compliance. Step 1, segregate your duties. One person cannot be the one to write the checks, approve the invoices, and reconcile the bank account. It just doesn't work. Step 2, audit your inventory. You need to know exactly what you own at all times. And step 3, implement strict multi-tier approvals for company expenses. A culture of accountability absolutely has to replace a culture of temptation, or your business will be blood dry. Section 5, red flags of bad management. How to spot the danger before you ever sign. You need to pay really close attention to these warning signs. If a manager proposes overly complex financial jargon that you just can't understand, there's a good chance they're hiding something. If your representatives remain physically distant or inaccessible, kind of like Badfinger's management, you have zero oversight. And crucially, watch out for predatory maneuvers. For example, when the Beatles brought in manager Alan Klein, Paul McCartney was actually warned that Klein had previously negotiated contracts for the Rolling Stones while quietly buying up their master tapes and publishing rights behind their backs. When you hear something like that, that is your cue to immediately walk away. In the modern business world, relying on a handshake and just good faith is entirely useless when disputes arise. You need formal, written contracts to dictate exact financial accountability. Paul McCartney realized the danger of their management situation way too late. Because the band was legally tied together in a partnership that gave Alan Klein authority, McCartney had to literally sue his own bandmates in court just to dissolve the partnership and extricate himself from a manager he knew for a fact was predatory. It took years of frozen royalties and nasty legal battles to undo that one bad handshake. And finally, Section 6, your partner vetting checklist, the final compliance test. I highly recommend you take a screenshot of this right now and use it before signing any business agreement. Going through this rigorous checklist is what ensures your survival. Don't hire your childhood friend to run operations unless they actually have a track record in operations. Guarantee that there is a transparent, independent accounting mechanism. Never, ever let a manager act as their own auditor. Build relationship history before signing 5-year deals. And most importantly, always have your own independent legal and financial advisors review the exact wording of the contract. Doing this builds a fortress of legal and financial security around your creative vision. And that brings us to the ultimate question you have to ask yourself. Will your creative genius survive your own business ignorance? The Beatles and Badfinger left us some truly incredible music, but their business ledgers, they are filled with pain, betrayal, and catastrophic loss. So take these historical autopsies to heart. Implement strict financial controls today. Thoroughly vet and audit your partners, and make sure you're celebrated for your success rather than remembered as just another tragic footnote in startup history. Until next time, stay smart and protect your assets.